All right, welcome to our second summer literary salon with David Perlstein, introducing his book Lola Flores, interviewed by Rabbi Jessica Graff.
Thank you. Thank you to Peter for helping us with all of the logistics, and Corey and Carolyn and Zach. It takes a village to get everything together. So hi, everybody, and welcome. I think some of you have been here, a couple of you, now for all of our summer salon series so far. And welcome to those of you who are joining us tonight. I'm really excited to be interviewing David, who I think all of you know in different capacities. I just said to him, I did not ask you for a formal bio, so I'm gonna sort of kind of make it up, because I think all of you know David and Carolyn. So anyway, they've been members here, I just learned, since 1985, you said, which is a very long time. Their 3 children grew up here at Congregation Shereth Israel, and they've been involved in so many ways in our community. David helps to write the newsletter, so you've seen his work locally, and also you've had a chance to see some of his books, to hear a little bit about them. You've authored, is it 7, 8 total, right?
Whatever it says on the back of Lola.
It says you have authored 7 other novels, so this is number 8.
I thought this was number 7, but let's not quibble.
He has written a lot of books, and tonight, and many other things, and he's a very creative mind. He's an inspired and imaginative thinker, and we get the privilege of hearing some of his book and getting to sort of pick his brain and see if we can understand a little bit of the genius within. So welcome to everybody. Do you want to say anything by way of introduction?
By way of introduction, I can keep that fairly short. I was born and grew up in New York, in a very Jewish world, which has affected a lot of my writing. I went to college. I got my BA in English at Alfred University in Western New York State. I served 3 years in the Army. On the GI Bill, I got a master's in English from St. Mary's University in San Antonio, which is where I happened to meet Carolyn while I was still in the Army at Fort Sam Houston. Got into advertising. We moved here in January '74. I worked for another advertising agency here for 5 years before going out on my own. So interestingly, my first book was published by Crown Publishers, which is a division of, now I forget, names go out of my head, but a major publishing house. And it was Solo Success, 100 Tips for Becoming a $100,000 a Year Freelancer, because I'd seen how terribly freelancers were treated, and I had done very well. And then I found out how terrible, Random House, the Crown division of Random House, which was owned by a big German corporation, because corporations own all of the publishers. And then I found out how badly authors can be treated by major publishers. They made no sense at all, but it was great. And I had gone through a previous period writing fiction, and then after Solo Success, at some point I got this idea about God's others, Non-Israelites Encounters with God in the Hebrew Bible, and that was an 11-year project. When I finished that, I stumbled back into fiction and wrote a novel almost on a whim, slick, and things are crazy. I wrote it on a whim, and Kirkus Reviews chose it as one of the 25 best indie books of 2012. So who knows how things are going to happen.
I love it. Okay, I want to start by reading the top line here about this wonderful book, Lola Flores. The hottest nightclub star in 1930s Havana guards 2 secrets. She is a Polish-born American Jew, and she has a penis. So this is the book that we are going to learn about tonight. It's an unusual story, and David, I want to first ask you how you came up with this crazy idea. You told me a little bit about it, and there's a question in the author's questions about this, and I think you told me that it is based here at Congregation Shareth Israel and Torah study, not exactly, but I'm going to say that you were inspired maybe the morning that you came up with this wild story from something in the Torah. Will you tell us a little bit about where this idea came from?
Well, I would say first, I don't think it's an unusual story in that I think it was the French philosopher Antonin Artaud who took it from somebody else centuries before, who said, nothing human is alien. So if it's a human story, it's in the realm of possibilities. I would say that Torah study did not inspire the story, but my ideas for my novels often come from bizarre places, and I couldn't possibly tell you why I spurt them out, but I do. So as it happened, after Torah study a few years ago, pre-COVID, I was having coffee with two friends, and as I am wont to do, I blurted something out. I said, did you guys know that the old Brazilian movie star Carmen Miranda was really a man? Now, if you ask me, why did I say that? I don't know, but there is a possibility something was lurking in the back of my brain, and that is Lola Flores is the story of a transgender woman at a time when the word transgender wasn't even used, and she could have no acceptance. And she was a remarkable entertainer, great singer, great pianist. Carolyn and I have a transgender son. So that certainly has been in my mind. Yossi really declared himself male, although he's kind of in between, but that's neither here nor there. He declared himself male. That's what he was comfortable with some years ago. And while it was a little bit challenging, because it was long enough ago, we didn't have a lot of information. He was our son. And so we supported him and still do all the way. So maybe that was in the back of my mind. I have to say, I told the same two guys years earlier at coffee, did you guys know that the National Basketball Association, I heard it this morning, if you lie right, people will believe. Did you know that they're expanding to Europe with 6 franchises? Only one of them is going to be in the Middle East. And they bought it, and I kept stringing them along until I finally said, no, I was just kidding you. But from that I developed the idea for Slick, which is a geopolitical satire set in the Persian Gulf. So where these other ideas, I got an idea for what became Flight of the Spumonis, about a boy who runs away from the circus. He's a trapeze artist. From watching, being at a one-ring circus, many, many years ago when Seth, our oldest, I think, was just a couple of years old. Carolyn's folks were in town, and we went to see Circus Vargas. And I wrote a short story, and after a while, back in the 80s, I said, this could make a good novel. This story could be the first chapter. And I wrote the novel, but then I rewrote it to what it is now 30 years after. It's much better than the original. So ideas can come from anywhere, and they do.
So this fanciful lie about Carmen Miranda just popped into your head, and then out it came?
Well, as I had with the story about the NBA expanding, when I got home, first thing I did, because the guys didn't really believe me, I wrote up and emailed them something that would look like a Wikipedia article. and the art of this kind of storytelling, and I hope we'll explore a little bit later. There's a lot of real life people, events, and so forth in Lola. If you put in enough truth, a lie becomes believable. So I put in real stuff about her. She was born in Brazil and this and that. But I threw in a few things like She worked for the FBI trying to root out Nazis in during the 30s, Nazis in New York, and then she went to Hollywood, and then later after the war, she was working with McCarthyites and the like to uncover communists in Hollywood and all of that. And by the time I finished that, I sent that to them, knowing they wouldn't believe me anyway, but that wasn't the point. The point was I had worked out some of the story. Not all of it, but some of I said, yes, this is a novel. And then it took 3 years to research it and outline it and so forth and write it. One interesting note, Yossi had given me for my birthday a book about Jewish Cuba before I had ever told him that I was going to write this book, and possibly before I even knew I was going to write it. But when I got it, I said, maybe I had it in mind, and I said, okay, when I'm ready to do research, I was writing on something else, this book is going to prove useful, and it very much did.
And do you follow these fanciful tales in other parts of your life in addition to just in your writing? I mean, Carolyn, where did she go? Does David do this at the dinner table?
Do I tell stories at home or whatever?
Tales?
Okay, so there, Carolyn said, for God's sake, and that about sums it up. I like to tell stories.
Okay.
And there's always something popping up into my mind. I may see something, observe something, and it sprouts.
And maybe hold on to it for a while.
Well, I do.
Till it's
I'm
time.
working on a novel now whose concept began with having lunch at a place down on Fillmore, and there was a pair of chaps, a cowboy's pair of chaps on the wall, and they were very small, maybe child size. So I told Carolyn, those chaps actually belonged to a guy who was very, very short and became, against all odds, became a star in Hollywood Westerns in the silent movie days.
Is there any truth to this at all?
Give me a break. But that spawned the idea for the novel I'm working on now, which has this guy and two other protagonists. I call it the underside of the American Eastern Jewish immigrant experience.
So I'm on to you. Next time you talk about the history of the Midianites, or I'm going to have to wonder.
No. If it's Torah study, it's true.
So, you dedicated this book to Yossi, and could you talk a little bit about that? I mean, is this kind of a gift to your son who helped you maybe think about these issues in some way, or would you have dedicated whatever the next novel was to Yossi?
I might have dedicated one, but I think this certainly Yossi was in the back of my mind when I decided I need to write this because first, among other things, I'm not an expert in transgender issues, although I did a good bit of research on it. But I know how challenging Yossi has found life. He happens to be living he's lived in places where he's been able to get along well. He now lives in Los Angeles. And he's got a big community of friends and so forth. But that does not stop the fact that there are places he might go where he really has to be on the lookout. He really has to be careful because there is a great deal of transphobia in this country. So a couple of things come out of it. One, I wanted to write about this trans character and what this trans character had to go through there's a front story and a back story. The front story, which is the bulk of it, starts in late October 1929. The story ends in 1954. But there's backstory, so we see how Lola's male self, developed, and these are little bits and pieces. I'll read one, interspersed throughout the front story, told in a different style, whole different way of doing it. But I wanted to show what happens when you put someone in a closet and won't let them out. So here, think of the problem. Lola Flores is a brilliant musician. You'll see just a touch of that in something I'm going to read later. A brilliant piano player, pianist, classically trained, a fabulous singer. She happens because her parents were well-to-do parents. They were immigrants, but they had a leather products business. And so she was fluent in Havana Spanish because the maid was from Havana. So you get English, Spanish, she understands Yiddish. A great performer, later became a terrific comedian, later went to Hollywood, became a big star for a few years. She could never reveal who she was. Now, thank God, Yossi can be Yossi, but he has to live. For the most part, he can be, certainly where he's lived, but somewhat on the lookout. And there are places where I know he's been uncomfortable, but he's doing pretty darn well. Lola could never tell anyone who she was. Now, there are a few people who did know. Read the story, you'll find out. There were a few people who did know. But this was tremendous difficulty. Now, what did this mean to Lola? Lola was very aggressive in developing her career, which she did. She did become Havana's hottest nightclub performer. She appeared on Broadway in New York and clubs. She did go to Hollywood and had a measure of success. But she had to do that battling a lot of inner demons. I mean, she couldn't totally get rid of her other self. You'll see she was born Anshel Sobel. We'll get to that. In America, she was named Albert to have an Americanized name. Quite a common thing. My father was 2 and a half, almost 3, 2.5, when the Perlstein family came to America. And his name was Moshe Chaim Perlstein. And he became Morris Harris Perlstein. So that was normal. But Albert sticks, this may not be the case, I'm just saying it's the case with Yossi, but this is a novel. Albert, for various reasons, sticks with Lola, and she tries to get rid of him, and then she can't. She uses that identity sometimes to go out in the world undetected. She can't go to an Orthodox shul and sit downstairs and participate in things, which she does as Lola Flores, although she could do it as a woman. And so it is no surprise that, like many entertainers, unfortunately, she becomes a great success on one hand and battles some really fierce inner demons on the other.
So this is a story about identity, really, and
it's not. Here's where it may be different from something that was written with a contemporary character, and why I deliberately did not set it today. First of all, I don't feel that I could set that story today because I am not as familiar as I might like to be with what trans men and women are going through, although I know some, and of course I know Yossi and Yossi's trans friends and so forth. But I want to leave that, I would leave that to someone else. In talking about identity, I wanted to write Lola as someone who knew her identity. Lola, as we're going to see when I read a little bit, Lola, as Albert, knew who she was. It's the rest of the world that refused to recognize her. So Lola always knew. at the same time, you see there is this lingering holding on to her Albert self, but that was part, of her growing up until she finally declared, I am Lola. She first used the name Lola Torres because she used to play with a lot of Cuban bands in New York. She'd leave the house. Her parents didn't want to have anything to do with her anymore. And she might play in the Village, up in Harlem, go to Brooklyn. She was known as Lola Torres, but obviously that wasn't her name, so nobody really knew who she was. She was always in hiding. That took its toll.
So there are so many Jewish themes in this book as well, and Jewish kind of through lines. Can you talk a little bit about how you wove those in, even giving a cameo appearance to your parents?
Yes, my parents, Lola appears on Broadway in the Ziegfeld Follies of 1936. There was a Ziegfeld Follies, there must have been 20 of them, originated by Flo Ziegfeld and then carried on by his wife after Ziegfeld died. And so she and a trans man, Fernando, who she met in Havana, who looks after her, dedicated his life to looking after her, are leaving the theater, and there's a crowd to see the stars, and from within the crowd, there's this big football player-looking guy carving his way through the crowd, and a redhead is following him, and the reason they're there, they ask for an autograph, and they say, we're teaching our. The woman does the talking. She says, my name is, I'm Blanche, and this is my husband, Morris. Those are my parents. And I'd love to get your autograph for our daughter, Kay. That's my older sister, because she's learning to play the piano and yada, yada. But it was put in there for a reason. The scene was to trigger Lola thinking about her own parents and her two sisters who don't know who she is. And she's there in New York. She's been a star for several years, and now she's on Broadway. So that I put that in. But the Jewish themes, look, for me, one way or the other in every novel, that's what it is, because that's where I come from. And I want to write about those things that concern me, that might bother me. I was certainly concerned that unlike Carolyn and me, who fully supported Yossi, but again, for drama's sake, Lola's parents did not support her. She had an older sister who was also antagonistic, but she had a younger sister born in America. My father had a younger sister born in America who did support her. But Jewish themes come naturally. You write about what you know. You write about who you are. It's not that you can't write about other people. I have other people. I got a lot of Cubans in this book. They're not Jews, although I have a young Jewish guy she falls for. That's another story. But you write about what you know. So for me, this is critical to be part of any story, almost any story that I write. Certainly, I think that all the novels have a Jewish component, beginning with Slick, whose protagonist is a retired Armed Forces officer. Carolyn says his name is Bobby Gatling. There was an early machine gun called the Gatling gun. His name is Bobby Gatling, and Carolyn said, well, he's really your alter ego, because he was Special Forces, and he was in Afghanistan and whatever. Tough guy, 6'4", but he walks with a limp. And because that's another story. It's in the novel. He finds out he's Jewish when he's 40. His parents were Holocaust survivors and never told him. And he becomes interested in learning a little about Judaism. And it goes through all the books. So it's just natural. It's a part of what I do.
So the book opens with this really powerful scene of Lola's family on the deck of this ship.
Which I'm going to read. Shall I read it now and then ask you another question?
Please,
Okay.
please. This image really stayed with me, and I think
Okay.
it's a beautiful opening to the book.
This is short. I'm good. This is short. It's kind of a preface. I wrote it, became a big, important part of the book originally, and maybe the first draft or two. It appeared as one of the flashbacks or backstory pieces, but I moved it up to a preface. And I'll just explain, I'll explain afterwards why this is here. Maybe ask, maybe you won't, but it doesn't matter. So it's a short piece, February 1912, The Lady. As the SS President Lincoln pitched and rolled into New York Harbor, Yankov Sobel, his near 2-year-old son Anshel in his arms, stumbled by the upper deck railing. Rivka Sobel called to her husband in warning and rebuke. Anxiety sharpened her normally hushed voice into one as penetrating as the single funnel liner's horn. Anshel's older sister, Tosha, giggled. Yankov frowned at his daughter, cast his wife an uneasy smile, widened his stance, and buttressed himself against the railing. He had no intention of being dislodged. In his defense, he had spent 9 disagreeable days crossing the Atlantic from Hamburg. Now, their native Warsaw, having provided no frame of reference, he could not resist being dizzied by Manhattan's looming skyscrapers. At 170 meters, or as they said in America, 560 feet, as he learned in a letter from his brother Mendel, the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company tower all but touched the steel-gray winter sky. The new Woolworth building would climb even higher. Anshel's face remained deadpan, his composure serene. He was too young to imagine his father losing his grip and dropping him into the swirling, white-capped waters below. Nor could he conceive how America would alter his family's history and his own singular future. Still, he sensed his parents' nervous excitement. The Golden Medina, the Golden Land, in effect, the Golden Medina offered Jews like the Sobels bright prospects. Yankel's brother Mendel, who left Warsaw for New York 3 weeks after Anshel's bris, had established the family's leather goods business. If smaller than the one Yankel sold off, it offered far more promise. The Sobels would enjoy security from pogroms like those several years earlier in Kishinev and Kiev, Odessa, Minsk, and Bialystok. A deck below, less fortunate steerage passengers in ragged winter clothing huddled shoulder to shoulder. The best they could do was warm themselves with their dreams. Traveling in second class, the Sobels would be allowed to take a ferry from the dock in Hoboken to Manhattan. Officials assumed them to be healthy and so unlikely to impose a financial burden on their new nation. The authorities required steerage arrivals to undergo immigration procedures on Ellis Island, accompanied by the risk of being sent back to Europe. The President Lincoln advanced northward among tugboats and ferries clogging the upper bay. An inhospitable wind shot down the Hudson River. It flogged exposed skin as mercilessly as any gale that ever roared up the Vistula. Rivka retreated further into her heavy wool coat, nestled her chin deeper into her fur collar. Yankov, the picture of a polar explorer, a Jewish Piri, pulled the fur flaps of his hat further down over his ears. Again, he came close to losing his footing. "Come away," Rivka protested. "You'll drop your son." "Drop my angel," said Yankov. A white stream of vapor shot from his mouth. His eyes denying Rivka further objection, he hoisted Anshel higher. "The boy must remember." He pointed to the statue that dominated the harbor. "Look, Anshela, the lady." Anshel gazed at the Statue of Liberty with an unnerving intensity. He studied the verdigris patina overlaying the lady's copper skin, her long flowing robe, her pointed crown. He noted her left hand holding a tablet upon which he would learn in school was inscribed with the date of America's independence. He followed the lady's right arm rising heavenward. Its torch of welcome bore its own crown, a golden flame. Yankov brushed his lips across Anshul's and breathed deeply of his son's innocence mixed with salt air redolent of smoke from thousands of coal furnaces. Inspired, he whispered words he sought to lodge in the deepest recesses of Anshul's memory, words Anshul would recover only decades later. In America,
Can you finish that line for us?
no, because it will be finished at the end of the novel, and you're going to have to see for yourself. And that's why it's not finished now.
So it becomes the most important line in the novel, I would say. It's a foreshadowing of the entire story and wraps things up so beautifully at the end of the novel.
I would say at the end, it's the summation of what Lola has gone through, the summation.
But it gives us this sense that something in America...
Oh, it completes the novel for sure. So, by the way, one of the reasons I wrote that scene, I mean, I just liked the concept of it, but I've always liked a fantasy. And look, my story is no different from so many others. I always liked to fantasize that when the Perlstein family came to America from Warsaw via Hamburg in February 1906, again, my father was about 2.5, that somehow my grandfather had held him up and pointed to the Statue of Liberty and said, as little as America. I cannot speak about, see a photo of, read about the Statue of Liberty, or talk about it as now without choking up what this country has meant to us, millions of other Jews and other people. It's been incredible, never been perfect, but it's given us a home. And I thought this image is particularly important for Lola.
It's such a powerful image, and I was recently in New York walking on the High Line, which I happen to love, did not exist in 1912. But, you know, as you round the corner and you can see just far in the distance the Statue of Liberty, you kind of get the chills. Even now on the High Line, you know, that every time it comes into view, that sense of kind of an entry into America, which is so extraordinary and has impacted so many families.
You mentioned the High Line. A few years ago, Carolyn and I were there, and we sat down on some steps. I'm not sure. It could have been on the equivalent right around 20th Street or something. And, of course, I said, it's amazing. We're sitting down on the High Line when the Perlstein family became citizens. That was my grandparents, my father, and 2 aunts, and another aunt, and then an uncle who were born in America. When they became citizens, August 25th, 1914, they lived a couple of blocks away, as Carolyn knew, at 100 West 17th Street. So we're only blocks away. We took the kids there, and because life changes, as it happens, it's a parking lot. But the building was there, the address is there, and I have their citizenship papers. So why do all these things resonate with me? Because they resonate with me.
Well, because it's history, and I think, you know, it's personal history. Jews have done a marvelous job of remembering through the generations and of retelling our stories. It's the story that needs to be told over and over again because it's our foundation, our individual foundation myth. So it's very powerful, and I love this image that you create on the deck of this ship. And I could only imagine, I mean, you know, with the ear flaps and how cold it is, it sort of didn't matter that the baby might catch cold because there's the lady, right? There was nothing more important than the lady, even a sniffle, never mind, even any of these things that could have happened dropping into the sea below. But the lady represented everything that was going to change. in their lives. In America, ... you have to read the book to know what's going to happen in America. Is there another section that you wanted to read from?
Two more small pieces to give a feeling of what's going on. So I read what serves as the preface in 1912. Let me turn to what is the next chapter, if you will, the beginning of the front story, the real front story. And I'll read just the beginning of this chapter. Might go as much as a page. October 1929, the Havana Special. Lola Torres, she's not Lola Flores yet, Lola Torres, hoping she'd entered the near-empty chair car on the Havana Special unnoticed, pulled down the window shade. She could not be sure, at least not yet, anyone was searching for her. But prudence demanded that she conceal herself from the platform until the train made its late evening departure from Penn Station. She set her nondescript gray cloth valise on the window seat to ward off anyone who might wish to join her and chat before sleep overtook them. Atop it, she placed her weighty volume of Shakespeare's plays and the evening's New York Sun. Whether she would be able to sleep sitting up remained in question. More certain, she would make every effort to stay awake for the next several hours, given the events of the past day. Continuing to follow instructions, Lola burrowed into her seat to make herself as small as she could. At 5 feet 5 inches, she was taller than the ideal woman portrayed by the popular song as 5 feet 2 with eyes of blue. The blue eyes she had. Also a slender figure, according to Mama, too thin, practically a scarecrow. Regrettably, Lola's feet more resembled a man's. About that, she could do nothing. The same was true of her hands. Fortunately, they lacked any hint of masculine bulkiness, and far from representing a minor curse, provided a major blessing. Long, supple fingers enabled Lola to play many of Rachmaninoff's most difficult chords, unreachable by some male pianists nearing or surpassing 6 feet. Accepting her physical limitations and fighting exhaustion, she made herself as comfortable as she could to begin the journey south to Key West. 2 nights on a train represented a small price to pay for a new life free from the constraints imposed on her for most of her 19 years. Let me say that this train trip is not going to be a pleasant one. And something else I wanted to mention as well. You know, I mentioned the Havana Special, and it leaves from Penn Station. On the radio a few years ago, an author, a novelist, mentioned that the internet is catnip to authors. Trust me, it is, because I did a ton of research because I want to salt in as many, because it had to flow, but as many real things as possible. So the name of the train that went from Penn Station to Key West, where a boat would take passengers to Havana, was the Havana Special. And it did leave from Penn Station every night at 10:05 p.m., as the conductor will later mention. It looks like we're on time for 10:05 departure. All the stops are real. I will go so far as to say I not only found the train schedule, but when Lola goes to the dining car for breakfast the second morning, the train is in Florida. She chooses, I think it's an 85 special breakfast, and I think she gave her this, and this. Well, that's what was on the menu, because I found the menu. So you have to, as Kenny Rogers sang, The Gambler, you have to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. So I'm constantly working on, I love this, but maybe I need to cut here or cut there, but still work in reality, what was real. And that it not only made it fun, but I think it gives a picture to the reader, because this was the world she was living in. So this was the train she took, and so on.
There we go. terrific. I think that it makes the story come alive with all those, those real details. Should we read the third section or take some questions from people?
Let me read quickly the third, and then questions will be great. Now, I mentioned that you just heard the very beginning of the front story, but there's backstory. I mean, Lola was a kid. How did Angela or Albert get to be Lola? I think this is the first piece of backstory, and each piece of backstory is short, written in a very different style. It's printed in italics, but it's triggered by something someone says, something Lola experiences, whatever. So that front story gives the opportunity for this to be brought out. Albert closes his worn copy of Pollyanna, takes up a small cast iron racing car, body and featureless driver painted red, wheels and tires black, pushes it in circles over the living room carpet, frowns, would rather be practicing Liszt's Mephisto Waltz No. 1. Didn't Mama and Papa purchase the baby grand for the sake of the children? For him? Madame Bashinsky, successor to Madame Silberman, thrills Mama with praise. No 8-year-old, the older student, plays Liszt with such flair. Still, like her predecessor, she can take Albert only so far. Albert devours her compliments, equally enjoys the applause when he performs for Uncle Mendel, Aunt Agnieszka, his cousins, his father's business associates. Today, he is ordered away from the piano. Papa and Mama have taken Tosha shopping downtown. 5-year-old Sylvia has a bad cold, naps in Maribel's small bedroom off the kitchen. Albert tosses the racing car aside, stares at the piano, wishes Maribel could play with him. He and Maribel converse in Spanish. Papa frets. Tosha scolds. America! Of course, Albert speaks perfect English. New York-born Sylvia only now grasps that Spanish, English, and Yiddish represent distinct languages. Worships her big brother. Albert retreats to the bedroom he shares with his sisters. After his bar mitzvah, he will take the guest room, wear long pants. Restless, he thumbs through an old children's book. Dutch twins, brother and sister, visit grandma. Ignores the text, stares at the pictures, craves the little girl's clothing. Dropping the book, Albert picks up one of Tosha's dolls, bisque porcelain, an infant girl. Strokes her blonde curls, examines her blue eyes, rosy cheeks, red lips, sees in them his own. Admires her blue dress, white booties edged in blue, fingers the delicate lace around her neck, moves her head, arms, legs, confides to her in Spanish, he desires a dress like hers. Goes to the large wardrobe, removes one of Tosha's dresses. The top emulates a sailor suit, wide collar, long sleeves, down the right side, shoulder to hip, large brass buttons parade single file. A belt ties the dress below the waist. Albert can't remember when Tosha wore it last. Takes off his white shirt and knickerbockers, slips into the dress, glances at the mirror on the wardrobe door. The dress is too large, no matter. He feels pretty, feels like who he is deep down inside, not Albert. Stared as at his reflection, fails to hear the bedroom door open. Maribel appears. Albert tenses. Has he been naughty? Maribel studies him. Do you like this dress? He nods. It looks very beautiful on you. Albert feels a new emotion, contentment.
Thank you so much. What questions do you all have? I would just invite you to share your name and then your questions so we can get to know you as well.
One? Okay. Hi, my name is Adan. Thank you. This is really cool. and I mean that. So I just have a question, just in regards to your authorship of this being the 8th book that you've written. Can you expound on what your framework is as an author when you're, when you're laying out the outline just for your books overall in your literary compendium?
Sure. I have a process. I think most authors would have a similar process. The way I work is, interestingly, I'm usually working on a novel while I'm starting thinking about the next one. So I was working on my novel 2084, which preceded Lola, and had this idea in mind, and then I got to the point where, okay, I have an idea, and now I want to start working on it. So I generally start with a treatment rather than an outline. The treatment can be a couple of paragraphs, but it can then grow into a page, 2 pages. I don't try to do too much. The treatment basically says, this is the story. These are the highlights. This is what happens. And most importantly, this is where it's going to end. I may change the beginnings. I changed the beginning here. I brought that scene on the ship up from being backstory. But I always know where it ends. And so I have a treatment, and I'm working on another novel, but I can still add to it. It's not like I do it once and put it down. Ideas come all the time. Finally, I get to the point where perhaps I finish the novel, I want to move on, I take the treatment, and then I turn it into an outline. Now, the outline isn't set in stone, but it does provide, it's like the skeleton that you're going to put the flesh of a body on, and you need that. So I'm, at the same time, I may be doing character studies. I may be thinking of characters I want to include, what they bring to the story. I may be thinking of events I'd like to have. And the outline starts to take shape. In this case, part of that included front story, but have to have some backstory. And the decision that backstory would appear in a different format than the front story. So I've got the outline, and when I get the outline to where I like it, very often what I do is, and it's not extensive yet, but I've often, in many novels, printed it out, cut each scene off into a strip of paper, gone into the kitchen, put it on the island, or the table that was there. And then I may rearrange some, but I like doing it physically. I have post-it notes, I'll write other ideas. Wait, I need a scene for, and I might even look at a scene and say, nah, toss it away. Scotch tape everything together, go back, redo the outline. Once the outline is done, I'm ready to start. Usually, I will look at a scene in the outline and be thinking about it. I may have 3 or 4 sentences. I may expand that to 10 or 12 or 15. Sometimes I'm almost writing the scene. But I want to think, what is it really that's going on here? What are the things I need to include? And then I start writing. And it's not that the scene writes itself, but I'm writing it. It's coming out of my head. The conscious mind is part of the work, but the subconscious mind really does the heavy lifting. I mean, that's creativity. And I will go, now some writers will just go through the whole thing quickly. I don't. On my first draft, I may rewrite each scene 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 times till I like the scene. Then I move on to the next. I go to the outline. I may, even while I'm writing the previous scene, I may be going to the outline because I've got ideas, and enlarge that scene in the outline, and then I move on from there. After a first draft, which usually I have my wife Carolyn look at, on Lola, I had another friend also looking at it, and I would ask them, give them chapter after chapter, just say, tell me what doesn't work for you. I don't care what you like, if you can tell me, but what isn't working, what are you not getting? And they tell me, which is great. And then for Lola, got through the first draft, then I started on a second draft. By this time, I hadn't seen the first chapters in quite a while, So I have a fresh look. And I'll revise, rewrite, other thoughts will come in. I may change the outline a little and so forth. And I think, and I have different people looking at it. My friend Ron Eaton looks at a draft. He's great at picking up typos and stuff, but really was saying, you might want to reconsider this or whatever. Finally, I get to the point 3-4 drafts down the line where I have a writing coach named Tom Parker, who's a fine novelist and short story writer and teaches writing fiction. And then Tom looks at it all at once. He gives me strategic feedback as well as page notes. And by that time, I'm ready to go over it one more time and get it together. It's a long process. I think Lola, with everything, was the longest. Took about 3 years to do. Well, it takes time. I have no rush. But it had to be right, and there was a lot of research involved, and because I had to go through it, but I had to do it, and it was fun, but took time as well.
Can I just ask just one more question? Pandemic-wise, did the pandemic have any impact whatsoever when you were authoring this book?
I'm sorry, say again?
Did the pandemic, in any regard, have any impact?
No. The pandemic didn't affect me at all. I used to be in advertising. I've been retired for a long time, writing at home. So nothing changed. I mean, what do? I don't do a lot. I write because I love writing. I mean, I really love writing. So novels, short stories, I've had some published. So I'm writing. I take 3 walks a day. When I'm writing, I can think about what I'm writing as well as just get the exercise. Actually, the only thing that changed with the pandemic is that I used to often go out to lunch, and then I started having lunch in the house. So that was my big change, because that was me, and it changed Carolyn's approach. She's an actor. It changed what she did more because classes were all on Zoom or whatever, and not in person. But I never missed a beat. I give you mine.
Well, no, you need yours.
Well, then you'll give it back.
When you come up with your next idea, do you run it by Carolyn at dinner first, or do you kind of guard it secretly?
No, I will tell her this is what's next, but I'm not looking. Honestly, I'm not looking for her approval. When an idea strikes me, that's what I'm going to do. So I'm on the second draft now, 3/4 of the way through the second draft of a novel that began when we were having lunch at the Haven, remember? Whatever, with the chaps. And it took a little while, and I said, yeah. Now, it took a while to develop the idea from this little guy who became a silent movie Western star into what I have, and that included having 2 other protagonists as well. But no, it's weird. An idea comes out almost out of the blue. And maybe it came out of the blue because somehow it was nestled in there and it just sticks. I don't think I've ever had an idea for a novel that I abandoned. It just hit me, and I went into it.
David.
Yeah, this is David Newman. A quick observation and a question. The observation is your opening scene. My sense is that her father is seeing America as this place of limitless possibilities, but doesn't realize exactly how limitless the possibilities are actually going to turn out to be.
Have you read the end of this novel?
I've read the novel. The question is, let's go back to a comment you made earlier about the persistence of Albert. And Albert comes across as something between a second personality, almost a split personality, a lingering identity, but Albert actually makes demands on Lola. He is a real part of her. And how is that just a creation of yours, or is that something that you know about people who are trans?
No, this is a creation of mine. As I always like to tell people, it's a novel. It's fiction. You're telling a story. And I said earlier with Antonin Artaud, it said nothing human is alien. If you look at a range of people of any kind, you're going to find all kinds of people. People with multiple personalities. People who may have a single personality, but struggle with who they are. Look, I have no problem telling people there's always been a clash inside of me between Morris and Blanche. My father was a very quiet person, an introvert. My mother was an extrovert who anyone could talk to, and she could talk to anyone and so forth. I've always wanted to be like Blanche, but I'm 85% Morris. Breaks of the game. But this is the kind, so I know from my own personality that people can almost adopt a kind of persona in some situations, adopt another one in other situations. So you're writing a novel and you want to expand, you want to push. Look, there are all kinds of styles of fiction, all kinds of ways of approaching a character. This is the way I approached Lola, because part of what, to me, added to the drama was there was the America, the Golden Medina, that was not going to allow her to be herself. Great possibilities for her father, whose business, he and his brother's business went great till the Depression. But Lola faced other problems. And so you're right about this is almost like another part of her personality, clinging to her and so forth. I just thought it made her an interesting character.
Please, Ellen.
Is it up? Yeah, it's on. So essentially 2 questions, but they're kind of linked. One is, do you read a lot of fiction to inform your writing in terms of choosing different styles and how you approach? And the other question that's related is, do you draw much from sort of the golden age of Jewish novelists that, that were kind of popular and writing a whole lot that, as we were growing up and young adults?
I would say both. For example, yes, I read a lot of fiction. There's a saying, writers are readers, so clearly. So I brought a little note card to say, well, what am I looking at now or in the past? So right now I'm reading Slow House by Mick Herron. It's a TV series, by the way, on I think it's Apple Plus TV, but this is the 7th in his series. It's very funny, a British thing. Recently I've read Anthony Doerr's Cloud Cuckoo Land and All the Light We Cannot See, fabulous. Night Boat to Tangier by the Irish writer Kevin Barry. And I've read, a whole bunch of people. My next novel that I'll read will be the new one by T. Caresson Boyle, who wrote his first novel many years ago, Water Music. I was just knocked over and said to myself, boy, I wish I had written that, but only T.C. Boyle could write that. And I have to say, one of my favorite novelists hasn't come out with a book in years now. His name is Chris Cleave. He's a Brit. His first novel, he had been a journalist. His first novel was Incendiary. It was on my shelf for 10 years. I had a preview copy. A friend who used to be the director of the Norwalk, Connecticut Public Library used to send me those books. It was on my shelf for 10 years, and I finally said, it's sitting there. I see it. I ought to take it down. Wow. Was that great? And he wrote, I think, 5 novels, but it's like he's fallen off the edge of the earth. I look him up every once in a while on the internet, nothing. And I read nonfiction, so Eric Larson, all the things. Eric Larson is one of the great nonfiction writers, and others, so I enjoy both. but it's necessary. Yeah, I will see something, see, gee, I like the way so-and-so handled that character, or handled the formatting of the novel. Not that I'm interested in copying that, because just about everything you can think of, trust me, it's been done. There is no, Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, there is nothing new under the sun.
Any other questions? Yes. Can we get the, yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Some of your novels, well, I think all of your novels, David, are filled with historical references, information about the time, what the Iceman did, what public transportation was like, et cetera, et cetera. One, am I right that you just take sheer delight in this information? And two, how do you decide what to put in and what not to put in?
One, I take sheer delight in the research and including this. The reason I put these things in is to bring whatever the time period is to the reader. You mentioned public transportation. I think in the novel I'm working on now, and Ron is reading the second draft for me, I mentioned in something that's set in Chicago in 1903, that Chicago at the time, they took the streetcar or whatever in Chicago, had the largest streetcar, cable car system in the world. Well, if they take the streetcar, it's important to show how they got from here to there, but I try to do it in passing. The other thing, for example, in Lola, most people have not been to Cuba, and nobody I know was ever in Cuba, say 1930 to 36. I mean, I don't know anybody who's been there who's that old. So how do you paint a picture of a place? You can just say Havana, and Lola went, well, she lived in the old city. You have no, the reader has no clue. So you try to salt in descriptions without letting them get in the way. And that's a balancing act, and it's hard. But I try to make them as absolutely accurate. I heard just on the radio just a short while ago, somebody said that fiction writers pay more attention to detail or the truth of something than journalists or historians do, you know. Well, maybe that's so, and I try to get it just right. So very briefly, there is a scene that takes place in the old city in the Plaza Vieja, the old plaza, and in the middle of the plaza is a fountain. And the fountain has three dolphins kind of standing up on their tails and water is spurting out. How do I know that? Because I found the photos. I found the dated photos. I also saw old films of Havana. So I know that that was the fountain in the plaza. Now, Carolyn had mentioned a few years ago, why don't we go to Havana and we can do research and see things? I said, if we were in Havana, we'd have gone to Plaza Vieja. We'd have seen a fountain. But it was a different fountain, because maybe 2 years after the scene takes place, the plaza was redone. So you can go places and see things and be misled. Thank God for the internet, you can see anything. And but I want to put you in Havana or 1930s New York or 1940s Hollywood. I want to put you at the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas, and I even want to get you a little bit into San Francisco in the early 50s.
Thank you so much for giving us a window into your mind and this book and some of the other writings that you've done. Are you willing to sign some books for us?
You buy them, I'll sign them. And my motto is Lola is $40 unsigned, but $20 signed. So what a deal.
What a deal. So books will be available in the back, and I just want to invite everybody to come next Wednesday night, same time, same place, when Stephen Wasserman, who is back here, is going to be our third author who is interviewed by Gordon Gladstone next week. And I'm so sorry to miss this next talk. I'm going to be out of town. But Steve has done an incredible job of researching his family history and his family's journey from Europe and through the Holocaust to post-Holocaust times. It was really a labor of love and a dedication of, I think, a personal interest in this story that became something that's available to all of us to learn from and to be really moved by. So I want to invite you all. This series came about because Steve handed me a copy of his book, and as I started reading it soon thereafter, maybe just before, a copy of your book also was handed to me, and a couple other people handed me copies as well, and I realized what a brilliant and interesting group of prolific authors we have here at Congregation Shereth Israel. So this series of 6 salons introduces us to the works of actually 7 authors. One of the 6 is going to be, is it 5 or 6? 6, I think. And I think we have 7 authors, because one is going to be 2 authors speaking together, the siblings handler. So I invite you to keep coming on Wednesday nights, and we're going to pause for Jewish Heritage Night with the Giants. That's our one Wednesday night when we won't be here, but hopefully we'll be there together eating popcorn and yelling, doing the wave, whatever it is that we do. So thank you all so much for coming tonight. Please hang out and take a look at the books, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Thank you.